The massive doors of the Terran Defense Academy slid open with a mechanical hiss that echoed through the cavernous entrance hall. Hundreds of new recruits poured through like a river of nervous energy, their boots clicking against the polished metal floors. The facility stretched endlessly in all directions, its walls lined with holographic displays showing humanity's greatest victories against alien threats across the galaxy. Lee Timon strutted through the crowd with the confidence of someone who had never faced real danger. His perfectly pressed uniform bore the subtle insignia that marked him as military royalty. His father was Admiral Lee of the Fifth Fleet, the man who had driven the insectoid hive armies from the Centauri system. Beside him walked Puck, Jinwoo, equally arrogant and equally privileged, son of General Park, who commanded the Mars defense grid. "Look at this dump," Timon muttered, gesturing at the state-of-the-art facility around them. Crystal-clear force fields contained floating holographic star maps, while advanced training mechs stood ready in transparent chambers. "My father said this would be challenging, but it looks like they'll take anyone these days." Jinwoo nodded, adjusting his collar with practiced superiority. Half these people probably never even left their home planets before today. Look at them gawking at everything like tourists. The orientation hall buzzed with nervous chatter as recruits from dozens of human colonies mingled for the first time. There were pale-skinned miners from the ice moons of Jupiter, dark-skinned farmers from the agricultural worlds of Alpha Centauri, and everything in between. Humanity had spread across the stars. But they had also learned they were not alone. In the universe, near the equipment stations, a figure stood apart from the crowd. Lieutenant Kim Na-young remained perfectly still while chaos swirled around her, her posture suggesting military training that went far beyond basic academy preparation. Her dark skin bore the unmistakable marks of battle, distinctive burn scars that ran down her left arm and neck like silver rivers. They were old wounds, healed but permanent, the kind that came from plasma weapons used by the spider-like Arachnid Empire. She observed everything with calculating eyes that missed nothing. While other recruits fumbled with their gear assignments, she had already memorized the layout of the facility, identified the emergency exits, and catalogued the weapon systems visible through the transparent walls. Her movements were economical and precise, like a predator conserving energy. "Hey, check out the damaged goods over there," Timon whispered, but his voice carried further than he intended. Several nearby recruits turned to look, their faces showing a mixture of curiosity and discomfort. "Wonder what charity case program got her in here," Jinwoo snickered, emboldened by his friend's cruelty. Maybe they needed to fill their quota. "Look at those scars. What kind of accident leaves someone looking like that? Probably got too close to a plasma conduit during maintenance." Other recruits began to notice the exchange. Some looked away uncomfortably, while others leaned in to hear more. "The toxic atmosphere of mockery began to spread like a virus through," said the group. "I heard they're letting in anyone now," added Kim Sun-ho, another recruit eager to join the popular crowd. "My uncle said the academy's getting desperate for bodies after the losses at Proxima Station. Now why?" Aung's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but she didn't turn round. Instead, she picked up her gear with practiced efficiency that spoke of countless deployments. Her movements were fluid and confident, suggesting familiarity with military equipment that most recruits wouldn't gain. Until months into their training, the mockery continued as more recruits joined in, their voices growing bolder. "Think she can even hold a weapon with those burned hands?" someone asked. "Hope she's not on my squad. Don't want damaged goods slowing us down." Across the hall, Sergeant Park Hyun-woo watched the interaction with growing displeasure. The gruff training instructor had seen enough combat to recognize the signs of a real veteran, and something about the scarred woman's bearing set off every alarm in his experienced mind. He slammed his metal baton against a reinforced table with a sound. Like a gunshot, the entire hall fell silent instantly. Hundreds of heads turning toward the imposing figure in instructor's stripes. Listen up, maggots. His voice carried the authority of someone who had survived the alien meat grinders of a dozen. Worlds, you think you're hot stuff because you made it through basic screening. You think daddy's rank or mommy's money means anything here? The recruits shuffled nervously as his gaze swept over them like a targeting laser. Behind him, holographic displays showed footage of humanity's wars against the various alien species that threatened their expansion, the Crystalline Shard Collective, the gaseous nebula mines, the mechanical construct legions. Half of you won't survive the first week, he continued, his voice dropping to a menacing growl. The other half will wish they hadn't, out there in the black. The bugs don't care about your family connections. The machines don't give a damn about your test scores. They just want to see you die screaming. As the recruits began filing out toward their dormitory assignments, Taimin couldn't resist one final act of petty cruelty. He deliberately positioned himself in Noyoung's path, then bumped into her shoulder with obvious intention. "Oops, sorry," he said with false sincerity, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Didn't see you there, Ghost." The nickname was meant as an insult, referring to her scarred appearance, but something in the way he said it made several nearby recruits pause. There was an odd resonance to the word, as if it carried meaning beyond mere mockery. For the first time since entering the academy, Noyoung looked directly at him. Her eyes were like black steel forged in the heart of a dying star, and for a moment that stretched like eternity, Taimin felt an unexpected chill run down his spine. It was the same feeling he'd experienced once when a hunting predator had looked at him during a safari on New Kenya. The sudden, primal recognition that he was face to face with something far more dangerous than he had realized. Those eyes held depths that spoke of things seen and done in the darkness between stars, of battles fought in the cold vacuum where sound could not carry screams. For just an instant, Taimin glimpsed something that made his confident smoke falter. The unmistakable look of a killer who had walked through hell and emerged victorious stopped then the moment passed. And Noyoung simply walked away, leaving Taimin standing frozen in place while his mind struggled to process what he had just experienced. The warning klaxon shrieked through the simulation chamber as red emergency lights bathed everything in an omen. As glow, the massive holographic environment materialized around the recruits, transforming the sterile training room into a war-torn alien city. Twisted metal structures jutted from the ground like broken teeth, while the acrid smell of simulated plasma burns filled the air. Tai-Min crouched behind a chunk of debris that looked like it had been ripped from a spacecraft hull. His heart pounded as he gripped his training rifle, sweat already beading on his forehead despite the climate-controlled environment round him. His squad members looked equally terrified as enemy fire erupted from multiple directions. The simulation was based on the infamous Battle of Kepler Station, where human forces had faced off against the mechanized armies of the Construct Legion. These weren't the insectoid hive creatures or the Crystalline Shard Collective that most recruits expected to fight. The Constructs were far worse, emotionless robotic killing machines that analyzed human tactics in real time and adapted accordingly. "Movement on the ridge," shouted Lee Min-young, one of Taimin's squad mates. She pointed toward a series of metallic structures where red targeting lasers were beginning to sweep across their position. "They've got us surrounded." Plasma bolts erupted from concealed positions, their blue-white energy searing through the air with a sound like tearing silk. The simulated weapons were perfectly safe, but their sensors would register hits and kills with brutal accuracy. One wrong move, one moment of hesitation, and the simulation would mark you as dead. "We need to fall back," Jinwoo screamed over the cacophony of explosions. His face was pale with panic as he pressed himself against their makeshift barricade. "Where's our backup?" Command said we'd have support. Taimin tried to remember the tactical briefing, but his mind was blank with terror. The enemy position seemed to be everywhere at once. And every time they tried to move, more plasma fire forced them back into cover. Their original strategy, a simple frontal assault, was crumbling like paper in a hurricane. Across the battlefield, Nayang's squad was facing the same impossible odds. But something was different about their section of the combat zone. While Taiman's group cowered behind cover, Nayang moved through the chaos like she belonged there. Through the smoke and debris, she flowed between cover points like liquid shadow. Her movements were impossibly fluid, as if she could predict where the enemy fire would be before it arrived. She rolled behind the twisted beam just as plasma bolts scorched the air where she had been standing, then immediately popped up to return fire with surgical precision. Contact left, 3 hostiles moving to flank. Her voice cut through the chaos with military precision. Calm and clear despite the mayhem round her, Park Ji-hoon suppressed that position. Kim Min-young, Watch R6, Taimin watched in stunned fascination as Nayang seemed to have memorized every enemy position, every angle of attack, every weakness in their formation. She moved with the confidence of someone who had done this 1,000 times before, not like a recruit in her first week of training. "How does she know where they are?" whispered Choi Soo-bin. Another member of Taiman's squad. "It's like she can see through the smoke." The construct enemies in the simulation were programmed to fight like their real counterparts. Cold, calculating, and utterly ruthless, they flanked, they adapted. They exploited every mistake, but Nayang was always one step ahead, anticipating their moves with an accuracy that defied explanation. She vaulted over a piece of debris and landed in a perfect combat rule. Her rifle already trained on a concealed enemy position, the plasma bolt that followed was so precisely aimed that it took out the target's primary weapon system, leaving it helpless for her squad mates to finish off. "Impossible," breathed Jinwoo, his own weapon forgotten as he stared at the display of tactical mastery. "She's fighting like a machine herself." Within minutes, the tide of battle had turned. Nayang's squad moved like a well-oiled military unit, each member knowing exactly where they needed to be and when. They leapfrogged between cover positions, laid down suppressing fire with perfect timing, and advanced with the kind of coordination that usually took years to develop. The enemy positions that had seemed impregnable moments before began falling one by one. Nayang identified weak points in their defenses that weren't visible to the other recruits, exploiting gaps in their coverage with surgical precision. Her squad mates followed her lead with growing confidence, their fear replaced by the exhilaration of victory. Meanwhile, Taiman's squad remained pinned down, their situation growing more desperate by the minute. They had lost 2 members to simulated kills, and the remaining fighters were running low on ammunition. Their training rifles felt clumsy and awkward in their hands. Nothing like the fluid extensions of will that Nayang seemed to wield. "We're getting slaughtered," Jinwoo screamed again, his voice cracking with panic. "This is impossible. Nobody can fight like that." The simulation chamber's speakers crackled with the sounds of distant explosions and the mechanical chittering of construct communication systems. In the real battle of Kepler Station, these same sounds had been the last thing many human soldiers heard before the machines tore them apart with plasma claws and fusion cannons. With a final decisive assault, Nayang's squad eliminated the last enemy position. The simulation ended abruptly, the holographic battlefield dissolving into the sterile white walls of the training chamber. Emergency lights switched back to normal illumination. and the acrid smell of simulated combat faded away. The scoreboard materialized in the air above them, showing the results in stark, undeniable numbers. Na Yang's squad had achieved a perfect tactical score. 0 casualties, maximum enemy elimination. Optimal resource usage. Timon's team showed the opposite. Multiple casualties, minimal enemy contact, complete tactical failure. How did she do that? Jinwoo whispered, his voice barely audible as he stared at Na Yang. She was calmly checking her weapon, running through post-combat procedures with the methodical precision of a seasoned veteran. Lucky guess, Timon replied, but his voice lacked all conviction. He had seen real combat veterans move like that during documentary footage from the Alien Wars, elite special forces operators who had spent years fighting in the darkness between stars. Not fresh recruits who had just arrived at the academy. Instructor Park Hyun-woo materialized beside them, his grizzled face showing an expression that none of the recruits had seen before. It wasn't quite amazement, but it was close. His eyes remained fixed on Na Yang as she methodically cleaned her training rifle with movements that spoke of countless real battles. Kim Na Yang, he said, his voice carrying a note of something that might have been respect. Outstanding performance. Your tactical awarenesses. He paused, searching for words. Exceptional. Na Yang simply nodded once, her expression unchanged. She slung her rifle over her shoulder with fluid grace and walked toward the exit, leaving behind a group of recruits who were beginning to realize they might not know her at all. As she passed Timon's position, their eyes met for just a moment. In that brief contact, he saw something that made his blood run cold. It was the same look he had glimpsed the day before, but now he understood it better. Those weren't the eyes of someone who had learned to fight in simulation chambers. They were the eyes of someone who had seen real war, real death, and real victory against impossible odds. The other recruits began filing out of the chamber, their conversations a mixture of awe and confusion, but Timon remained frozen in place, his mind struggling to process what he had just witnessed. Everything he thought he knew about the scarred woman was crumbling like his squad's tactical formation. The mess hall hummed with the low buzz of exhausted voices as hundreds of recruits slouched over. Their dinner trays, the day's training had been brutal, another series of combat simulations that had left most of them questioning their life choices. Steam rose from plates of synthesized protein and reconstituted vegetables, the standard military fare that tasted like cardboard but provided all the nutrients needed to keep soldiers fighting. Timon slumped in his chair at a table near the center of the vast dining hall, his pristine uniform now wrinkled and stained with sweat. Round him sat his usual crew of privileged recruits, Jinwoo, Kim Sun-ho, and Park Dong-hyun, all sons of high-ranking military officials who had expected their academy experience to be a mere formality before receiving their commissions. This is insane, Jinwoo muttered, poking at his food with obvious disgust. My father never mentioned anything about getting humiliated by some scarred freak every single day. The other recruits at nearby tables were having similar conversations. Word had spread quickly through the academy about Na Yang's impossible performance in the training exercises. Some whispered theories about performance-enhancing drugs or hidden technology. Others suggested she had somehow gained access to the simulation programs in advance. I'm sick of this, Timon announced loudly, his voice carrying across multiple tables as he slammed his metal tray down with a crash that made other recruits jump. Every single exercise, every single test, and somehow she makes us all look like complete idiots. His outburst drew attention from across the mess hall. Conversations died down as heads turned to watch the drama unfold. Even the serving staff behind the food counters paused their work to listen. Maybe she's just better, suggested Lee So-young, one of the few recruits who had shown Nayan any respect. She sat at the far end of their table, her own tray barely touched as she watched Timon's growing agitation with obvious concern. "Better," Timon laughed bitterly, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Look at her. She's scarred up like damaged cargo from some freight accident. How does someone who can't even avoid getting burned in whatever stupid mishap she was in suddenly become a tactical genius?" The mess hall began to quiet as his words carried across the room like ripples in a pond. Forks stopped moving. Conversations died mid-sentence, and all eyes turned toward the corner where Nayan sat alone at a small table. She continued eating methodically, her movements precise and economical, seemingly ignoring the growing commotion around her. "I bet she's here because of some diversity program," Timon continued, emboldened by the attention and standing up now. His chair scraped against the floor with a harsh sound that echoed through the suddenly quiet space. "Fill the quota. Make the academy look good in the recruitment videos, but put the rest of us at risk with substandard recruits who don't belong here." Several recruits shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The academy's diversity initiatives were well known. Humanity's expansion across the galaxy had created dozens of different colonial cultures, and the military worked hard to ensure representation from all human settlements. But everyone knew that academy standards were supposed to be absolute, regardless of background. "Think about it," Timon pressed on, his voice growing louder with each word. "She shows up looking like she lost a fight with a plasma cutter, and suddenly she's outperforming people who've been training for this their whole lives. People whose families have served in the military for generations." Kim Sung-ho nodded along enthusiastically. "My uncle commands the Jupiter Defense Fleet. He says they're under pressure to recruit from the outer colonies, even if the candidates aren't up to traditional standards." "Exactly," Timon continued, pacing now as his audience grew larger. "While we're here on merit, she's probably here because some bureaucrat needed to check a box on a diversity report. And we're all supposed to pretend that's fine while she makes us look incompetent." From across the mess hall, other conversations had completely stopped. The only sounds were the hum of the air recycling systems and the distant clatter of dishes being cleaned in the kitchen. Even the veteran instructors who often ate with the recruits had paused their meals to watch the unfolding drama. "That's enough," came a quiet voice from the corner. The words were spoken softly, but they carried across the silent mess hall like a gunshot. Every head turned to see Nayan standing slowly, her scarred hands flat on the table surface. Her meal remained half-finished, but her full attention was now focused on Timon. When she spoke, her voice carried an authority that made veteran instructors straighten their spines. It was the kind of voice that had given orders in the heat, a battle that had coordinated life and death decisions in the darkness between stars. Even Sergeant Park Hyun-woo, eating at the instructor's table, sat up straighter when he heard it. "You want to know about my scars, recruit?" she asked, her words precise and delicate. Each syllable was carefully measured, like ammunition, being loaded into a weapon. "You want to know about standards?" Timon felt his throat go dry, but his pride and the attention of his peers drove him forward. "Yeah, I do. What kind of accident leaves someone looking like that? Industrial mishap? Shuttle crash? Because whatever it was, it doesn't exactly scream military excellence to me." "No accident," Nayan interrupted, stepping forward with fluid grace. Her movement was so smooth and controlled that it seemed almost predatory, like a hunting cat stalking its prey. "Battle damage, plasma burns from holding a position while civilians evacuated." The mess hall fell into a silence so complete that The hum of the air recycling systems seemed deafeningly loud. Several recruits leaned forward in their chairs, straining to catch every word. Na Young continued, her voice never rising above a conversational tone, but somehow carrying to every corner of the vast row. But you wouldn't know anything about that, would you? You've never seen real combat, never had to choose between your own safety and the lives of others. Never had to hold a position while plasma fire melted the air around you and alien claws tore at. Your armor. She took another step forward, and Taimin instinctively stepped back, his bravado crumbling like a house of cards. You talk about standards, recruit, about merit and qualifications. Tell me, what exactly have you done to earn your place here? Besides being born to the right parents, the question hung in the air like a challenge. Taimin's friends at his table suddenly found their meal trays fascinating. Unable to meet his eyes, the other recruits watched in fascination as their tormentor was slowly being dismantled by calm. Precise words. I've trained my whole life. Taimin managed to stammer, but his voice lacked conviction. My family has served for generations. I know tactics, strategy, military history, book learning. Na Yang said dismissively, theory without practice. You know what plasma burns feel like from reading about them in safety manuals. I know what they feel like because I've walked through plasma fire to save lives. She was close enough now that Taimin could see the intricate pattern of her scars, the way they followed the contours of her arm and neck like a map of some terrible battle. They weren't random marks from an accident. They were the precise pattern left by military-grade plasma weapons. So tell me, recruit, Na Yang continued, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the silent mess hall. What exactly makes you qualified to judge anyone's worth? Taimin opened his mouth to reply, but no words came. His mind, usually so quick with cruel remarks and cutting observations, was completely blank. Under Na Yang's intense stare, he suddenly felt very small and very young, like a child who had been caught playing with toys he didn't understand. The silence stretched on, broken only by the sound of his own rapid breathing in the distant hum of the space station's life support systems round him. Hundreds of recruits watched in fascination as the Academy's biggest bully was reduced to speechless humiliation by nothing more than quiet words and an unwavering gaze. Finally, Na Yang turned away, dismissing him as completely as if he had never existed. She walked back to her table, picked up her tray, and headed toward the disposal units with the same fluid grace that had carried her through the combat simulations as she passed his table. She paused for just a moment. The universe is full of real monsters. Recruit. Don't waste your energy creating imaginary ones. Then she was gone, leaving Taimin standing alone in the center of the mess hall while hundreds of pairs of eyes watched his complete and utter defeat. The warning silence echoed across the Academy grounds as a sleek military transport descended from the morning sky. Its hull gleamed with the distinctive markings of high command. And every person on the base knew that unscheduled visits from ships like this meant only one thing. Someone very important was about to make their day much more complicated. The entire Academy snapped to attention as General Choi Dae-ho stepped out of his transport, his polished boots clicking against the landing pad with military precision. The legendary war hero was a living piece of human history, known throughout the galaxy as the architect of humanity's greatest victories against alien threats. His weathered face bore the scars of countless battles, and his eyes held the weight of decisions that had saved or doomed entire worlds. Behind him emerged his aide, Colonel Lee Min-ho, a sharp-eyed officer whose reputation for perfection made even veteran instructors nervous. The colonel's hands moved quickly across his digital tablet, recording everything with the efficiency of a machine designed for judgment. "Form ranks," Sergeant Park bellowed, his voice carrying across the parade ground with the force of a sonic boom. Hundreds of recruits scrambled into formation, their movements frantic as they tried to achieve perfect alignment while their hearts hammered against their ribs. The morning sun cast long shadows across the assembled formation as General Choi began his inspection. His movements were deliberate and measured, each step calculated to maximize the psychological impact on the nervous recruits. He had conducted thousands of these inspections across dozens of worlds, and he knew exactly how to read the character of young soldiers through their posture, their eye contact, and the barely-controlled tremor in their hands. His experienced eyes swept across the formation, evaluating each recruit with the same intensity that had once analyzed alien battle formations during humanity's darkest hours. Some recruits wilted under his gaze, their confidence evaporating like morning mist. Others stood straighter, drawing strength from the presence of a living legend. The general stopped in front of several recruits, asking brief questions about their training progress and background. His voice was calm and measured, but every word carried the weight of absolute authority. When he spoke, even the wind seemed to pause in respect. "You, recruit," he said, stopping in front of a pale young woman from the outer colonies. "What's your assessment of the Academy's combat training program?" "Sir, it's challenging but fair, sir," she replied, her voice steady despite the obvious nervousness. "Good. Challenge builds character. Comfort breeds weakness." He moved on without another word, leaving the recruit glowing with pride at having passed his brief test. When he reached Timon, the general paused for a longer moment. His eyes took in the recruit's perfect posture, his expensive equipment, and the subtle signs of privilege that marked him as military royalty. There was something calculating in the general's expression, as if he was solving a complex equation. In his head, name and colony of origin. Recruit, Lee Timon, sir. New Soul Colony, sir. Timon's voice carried across the parade ground with practiced confidence, though sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool morning air. "General Lee-san, your father speaks highly of you." The general's tone was perfectly neutral, revealing nothing of his true thoughts. "He says you show great promise as a tactical thinker." "Thank you, sir. I hope to live up to the family tradition, sir." General Choi nodded once and continued down the line, leaving Timon standing proudly while his fellow recruits cast envious glances in his direction. Being personally acknowledged by the general was the kind of moment that launched military careers. As the inspection continued, the general's aide made careful notes on his tablet. Every recruit's performance was being recorded, analyzed, and filed away for future reference. The Academy's instructors watched nervously from the sidelines, knowing that their teaching methods were being evaluated along with their students. The morning sun climbed higher as General Choi methodically worked his way through the formation. He questioned recruits about their knowledge of alien species, their understanding of space combat tactics, and their reasons for joining the military. Some answers impressed him, others did not, but his expression remained unreadable throughout. Then, as he continued down the line, General Choi suddenly froze. His eyes had fallen on Na Young, standing at perfect attention with the other recruits for a long moment that seemed to stretch into eternity. He simply stared at her, his weathered face cycling through expressions of surprise, recognition, and something that might have been more. The scarred woman stood motionless under his scrutiny, her posture flawless and her eyes fixed straight ahead. But there was something in her bearing that distinguished her from every other recruit on the field, a quality that spoke of battles fought and won in the darkness between stars. Then, to everyone's absolute shock, General Choi raised his hand in a crisp military salute. Colonel Kim Na-young, he said, his voice carrying across the silent parade ground with the force of a thunderclap, or should I say, Ghost Walker. A collective gasp rose from the assembled recruits like the sound of escaping atmosphere. Several instructors who had been standing casually suddenly snapped to attention, their faces pale with recognition. Even Sergeant Park's jaw dropped open in stunned disbelief. Ghost Walker. Someone whispered from the ranks, their voice barely audible but carrying clearly in the stunned silence. That's impossible. Ghost Walker is a legend. Other recruits began murmuring among themselves, their voices creating a low buzz of confusion and amazement. The name Ghost Walker was spoken with the same reverence usually reserved for mythical heroes from ancient stories. General Choi turned to address the entire formation, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had commanded fleets in humanity's darkest hours. Recruits, you've been training alongside the most decorated special forces operative in human history. Colonel Kim Na-young, call sign Ghost Walker, is the sole survivor of the Battle of Kepler Station. Taimin felt his knees go weak as the words hit him like a physical blow. The Battle of Kepler Station was legendary throughout human space, a single operative holding off an entire alien fleet for 3 days while civilian transports evacuated over 10,000 people. Children learned about it in school, and military academies studied it as the ultimate example of heroic sacrifice. Huskars, the general continued, his voice carrying across the stunned silence like a eulogy for the dead, from walking through plasma fire to reach the station's main reactor. She held that position for 72 hours straight, taking fire from multiple alien warships while coordinating the largest civilian evacuation in human history. The parade ground fell into a silence so complete that the distant hum of the Academy's power generators seemed deafeningly loud. Every recruit stared at Na-young with no eyes, seeing not the scarred woman they had dismissed or mocked, but a living legend who had sacrificed everything to save innocent lives. The alien fleet chief faced. General Choi continued, his voice, heavy with the weight of history, consisted of 12 construct dreadnoughts, 37 cruisers, and over 200 Vitacraft. They had come to harvest the station's population for their organic processing facilities. Several recruits visibly shuddered at the mention of the construct harvesting operations. The mechanical aliens were known for their ruthless efficiency in converting organic matter into raw materials for their war machine. Colonel Kim held her position in the station's reactor core while plasma fire melted the bulkheads round her. She called in targeting coordinates for our fleet while alien boarding parties tried to cut through her defenses. For 3 days and nights, she was the only thing standing between 10,000 civilians and certain death. Na-young remained at attention, her expression unchanged. But Taimin could see something different in her eyes now, the weight of history, the memory of choices made in the crucible of war, and the burden of being the sole survivor of a battle that had claimed thousands of lives. The general's words painted a picture of heroism that transcended anything the recruits had imagined possible. Here was someone who had faced the ultimate test of human courage and emerged victorious, bearing the scars of that victory for all to see as the full magnitude of the revelation sank in. Taimin felt his entire world crumbling round him. Every cruel word, every mocking gesture, every moment of prideful arrogance came rushing back with devastating clarity. He had been torturing a war hero, a living legend who had sacrificed everything for the sake of strangers. The morning sun continued to climb, but for Taimin, the world had grown very dark indeed. The parade ground felt like it was holding its breath as General Choi's words echoed across the assembled formation. The morning sun cast long shadows between the ranks of stunned recruits, each one trying to process the impossible revelation that they had been training alongside a living legend. The reason Colonel Kim has been here, General Choi announced, his voice carrying the weight of classified secrets and desperate necessity, is to evaluate this new generation of recruits for Operation Shadowfall. Humanity's most classified and dangerous mission, the name hung in the air like a death sentence. Operation Shadowfall was whispered about in the darkest corners of military intelligence, a mission so secret that even its existence was considered classified information. Rumors spoke of an alien threat so terrible that conventional military forces would be useless against it. He gestured to Na Young, who stepped forward with the fluid grace of a predator moving through tall grass. Every movement was controlled and purposeful, betraying nothing of the thoughts racing through her mind. Colonel, your assessment. Na Young's eyes swept across the assembled recruits like a targeting laser, lingering on each face with the intensity of someone who had learned to read human souls in the crucible of war. She had watched them for weeks, studying their reactions under pressure, their treatment of others, their true character when they thought no one important was watching. When her gaze fell on Taimin, he felt like she was looking straight through him to the core of his being. Every cruel word, every mocking gesture, every moment of arrogant superiority was laid bare under that penetrating stare. He wanted to sink into the ground and disappear, but his legs felt like they were made of lead. Sir, I've observed these recruits under various conditions of stress, combat simulation, and social pressure. Na Young began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had commanded troops in humanity's darkest hour. Character reveals itself not in success, but in how one treats others when they believe themselves superior. The assembled recruits shifted nervously as her words sank in. Many began to realize that their every interaction had been a test there. Every casual cruelty or moment of kindness carefully noted and evaluated. She pulled out a digital tablet, its screen glowing with the names and detailed psychological profiles of every recruit in the former. Weeks of observation had been distilled into precise assessments of courage, honor, and humanity, the qualities that would determine who lived and who died in the darkness between stars. The following recruits have demonstrated the honor, courage, and humanity required for special operations, Na Young announced, her voice cutting through the morning air like a blade. Lee So-young, Park Ji-hoon, Kim Min-young, Choi Soo-bin, Han Yi-jin, Lim Tai-hyung, Song Mi-young. The list continued, each name falling like a hammer blow on the ears of those not chosen. Taimin listened with growing horror as recruit after recruit was called forward, the ones who had shown kindness to Na Young, who had defended her against mockery, who had treated her with the respect due to any fellow soldier. His heart sank like a stone in deep water as he realized his name was conspicuously absent. Jinwoo stood beside him, equally stunned by their exclusion, both of them finally understanding that their prejudice and cruelty had been noted and evaluated every single day. Those selected. Na Young continued, her voice carrying across the silent formation, will join the most elite unit in human space. They will face threats that would terrify seasoned veterans. They will defend our species against enemies that exist in the nightmares of military planners. They have earned this honor through their actions, not their words. General Choi nodded approvingly, his weathered face showing satisfaction at the selection. Colonel Kim will lead this new unit. Her experience and judgment are beyond question. These recruits will receive training that will push them beyond the limits of human endurance. They will learn to fight enemies that conventional military doctrine cannot address. As the selected recruits stepped forward, their faces showed a mixture of pride and terror. They understood that they were being chosen for something far more dangerous than normal military service. The whispered rumors about Operation Shadowfall suggested missions into the deepest reaches of space, where humanity's most dangerous enemies waited in the darkness. Tai-min remained frozen in place, watching his former classmates move toward a destiny he would never share. The weight of his Failures pressed down on him like the gravity of a dying star. Everything he had worked for, everything he had believed about his own destiny, crumbled to ash in his mouth. Jinwoo stood beside him, equally stunned by their exclusion. The two young men who had entered the academy with such confidence now faced the reality that their privileged backgrounds meant nothing in the face of their moral failures. Na Young approached Time In one final time, her footsteps silent on the parade ground's polished surface. When she spoke, her voice was quiet enough that only he could hear, but her words carried the weight of hard-won wisdom. You asked about my scars, recruit. Let me tell you what I learned when I earned them. True strength isn't about who you can tear down. It's about who you choose to lift up. She paused, letting the words sink in like acid into metal. The universe is vast and full of creatures that want to see humanity destroyed. We waste our energy fighting each other instead of preparing for the real threats waiting in the darkness. Then she turned to address the entire formation, her voice carrying across the assembled recruits like a final judgment. The universe is vast and dangerous. Humanity's survival depends not on our individual abilities, but on our capacity to see the worth in each other. Those who failed this test fail not because they lacked skill, but because they lacked character. The morning sun climbed higher as the ceremony concluded, casting harsh shadows across the parade ground. The selected recruits were led away to begin their new training, their faces showing the grim determination of soldiers who understood the magnitude of their responsibility. As the formation began to disperse, Time In watched Na Young, Colonel Kim Na Young, the Ghost Walker, disappear into the shadows of the academy corridors. She moved with the same fluid grace that had carried her through the training simulations, but now he understood that those movements came from walking through plasma fire to save innocent lives. He finally understood that he had been in the presence of a legend, and his prejudice had cost him the chance of a lifetime. The remaining recruits were dismissed to continue their basic training, but Time In knew that his path would never lead to the elite units that defended humanity's frontier. The lesson burned in his mind like plasma fire. Never judge a warrior by their scars, for those marks might be the proof of their greatest victories. In the vast darkness of space, where alien threats waited to devour humanity, character mattered more than privilege, and honor was worth more than gold. As the academy returned to its normal routine, Time In began the long journey of understanding what it truly meant to be human in a galaxy full of monsters. Some lessons, he realized, could only be learned through failure and regret. The Ghost Walker had vanished into the shadows, taking with her the best of humanity's defenders. Behind her, she left only the echo of footsteps and the memory of what courage looked like when it wore the scars of sacrifice. The end.